I would like to make some time here since we don't always have Snow with us to kind of talk about some raid stuff. Since we do have our raid leader with us, I'm actually going to start calling your. I'm officially proclaiming that Snow, when he comes on our podcast, has his own segment, and we're going to call it Ready Check.
Oh, okay.
Right, so this is Snow's Ready Check. Snow, I want to talk a little bit today about building a raid team because I know you're in the process of putting together a raid roster. So since a lot of guilds and a lot of folks will be doing that themselves, what's your process and when it comes to setting up a raid team and what you're looking for and who does what job role and all of that?
So, considering that we've had a viable raid team for a fairly long time, with some fairly experienced raiders, is a lot different to if you were establishing a raid team where you didn't know the people. With that, though, you've got to make sure that you're accounting for people being able to duck in or duck out of the raid as well. So you want to try and give yourself wide enough scope of skill sets rather than just trying to build the absolute minimum. So the 2 tank, 4 healer, blah, blah, blah. You want to try and widen that skill set. So you've got at least 4 people who could be tanks, who've shown skill in that area. And with those tanks, you want them to be level-headed with a good grasp of changing mechanics. So you want to be able to trust that the people who are tanking are going to be able to pick up the mechanics quickly, and at the same time not get frustrated when DPS or the healer group miss a particular mechanic, just so that it keeps the raid moving at a steady pace. The second thing you want to look for in terms of your raid team is a healer group, and in that group you want to have at least 2 AoE based healers, either druids or something along that line. I know that at the moment the resto shamans are going to be okay for progression, but they're not going to be high end, particularly when it comes into heroics. So that's a thing to be aware of. You also want your healer group to have some cohesion in their members. So you want them to be able to trust one another and also be able to learn one another's actions when particular raid mechanics occur. Following that, with your DPS group, you need to give yourself a decent balance of melee and range DPS. AoE range DPS are much more desirable than single target for progression, but then it slowly rotates back the other way, so you want more single target range DPS than AoE. And again, with those two groups, you want them to be able to adapt to changing mechanics or to be able to spot issues within the raid and be able to address them. We were lucky last expansion that we had 2 very, very good DPS who would pick up raid mechanics without being asked, and they had the capacity to track issues before they'd occurred.
I saw that a lot last expansion. You guys are a very different raid team than one I've had experience with prior, so it's kind of great to see, and hear about the process. Are you anticipating for this upcoming raid anything out of the ordinary when it comes to how you're building your team? Or is it going to be pretty much just a standard raid team? Because I know I watched some of the videos from Fat Boss, and I think we're going to have a couple interesting fights. I know the first fight of this raid is not going to be a cakewalk from what the experts are saying.
Yep. So there's as a raid leader, one of the things you need to be looking out for is clutch techniques. So you want to be looking for particular actions that your raid will do that severely hamper the amount of damage going out to the raid or a particular boss action. So with regards to the first boss, that's one of the things that I'll be looking for is clutch mechanics that we can try and use to evade large portions of the damage going out to the raid. Also, because it's a bit of a timing check, the tanks will need to coordinate quite quickly in order to stop one-shots, as well as the healer group needs to be on point when it comes to saving mechanics. So like emergency bark skins, AoE heal, etc., etc. So that's something that we'll need to keep an eye out for. I want to get as much exposure on the first boss as we can in order to develop a really good process for when we move to heroic.
Now, as far as setting all of this up is concerned, I know starting a new raid is always with especially with a good mix of people is going to be a trial and error process. I think you'd agree with that. So when it comes to building a team, obviously there's always the downside of you're working with folks who may not have as much experience with raiding, or someone who's not really performing in class or spec that they're coming to raid with. What would be your advice to folks coming into a raid that they haven't been raiding with prior to that? When it comes to their
Mm-hmm.
DPS and expectations, because obviously, let's say you have 40 people that want to raid, you can only have so many people on a raid team. So how do you kind of define the criteria for getting onto the team on a permanent basis?
Yep. So the three things that define a good raider are awareness, an ability to adapt, and the third one is a deeper knowledge of their class. So you want to be trying to pursue as much detail in your class mechanics as you possibly can from a personal standing. Then you want to be able to practice doing things differently to help you develop the second part of the process, which is to be adaptable. And also you want to be able to listen to direction, and even if you don't agree, to be able to change direction and just to try stuff.
So being open to change and trying new things and all of that.
Well,
That's great. Go ahead,
What
sorry,
we-
Kenny.
what we've seen a lot in raids is that there's always another way to skin a cat, right? And you'll get people in the raid that's seen it done this way, which doesn't mean they're wrong, but a lot of times our mechanics are established based on our raiders and how we do things. Not specifically, you show up and this is your first raid, and it's like, well, my last raid group did things this way. Well, that's your last raid group. This is the raid group now. And we do take suggestions, but keep in mind that our raid team is probably not going to be exactly the same as your raid team is. I have different tanks, different healers, different ways of doing business. And you'll get a lot of people that show up who, know a better way, or so they think they do. Or not a lot, but you'll get generally the newcomer will show up and he's like seen it done this way. And it's like, just listen to how the raid leader wants it done and do it that way. If you got something that you think should be done differently, then whisper the raid leader or talk to the raid leader after the raid. Don't sit there and throw them in the middle of the raid because we're not doing it the way your last raid team did it.
I mean, the other thing too is taking consideration, like you just said, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So you can do things different ways to get the ultimate outcome. But if we see that something's not working, etc., I know that the raid leaders talk, and sometimes we guild chat, especially if we don't have all guildies, etc. And I've seen well, maybe someone says that they've had success doing it this way. Maybe we should just try it. So we're not like walls closed. We're open for suggestions too, and that's also part of what helps our group out. Is no one's like strict. It's got to be this way. It's got to be this way. Can't be any other way. They're flexible.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes in when you're developing your mechanic as a group. So rather than use that whole, this is the method and we're not going to deviate from the method, you just got to learn my method until we get to the end. There's a much more organic process. And as a raid leader, in my particular style, which is quite collaborative, that's one of the ways that you will be able to progress as a group is that you will take the inputs from, say, I don't know, your healer group if they've got a particular thing that they're spotting that someone has done, or something that they notice in their own motions that they're doing throughout the fight. Having that information come back is key.
And I don't know. I mean, I'm just speaking from hearing. I'm not a raid leader by any way, shape, form, and don't ever plan on being one. I just like sitting in the background and doing my pew 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 thing. But doesn't it depend too on the amount of melee DPS versus range DPS and the makeup of the group of how you do things?
Yeah, it comes in as a major factor. When our raid composition changed towards the end of the expansion, we found it was a lot harder, and part of that was because of the change of the composition of the group. So the number of people that we had as single target range DPS dropped out, and we had a lot more cleave. So it made the following of certain mechanics and some of the things that we'd skipped a lot harder.
And I mean, and I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody else, but I mean, kudos to all the different raid leaders, alt raid leaders, whatever we have, because y'all are the ones that know everything. And you've watched the videos more than other people have. You know that this class, if we get too much of this kind, we need to shift this direction. And the rest of us just kind of, we do as we're told type deal. And, if you say, let's do it this way, then we try it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then we redirect, etc. And, see one, do one, teach one type deal with mechanics.
Yep, and for people who are new raiders, one of the key things is as a raid leader, is to remain flexible with their own particular style of play as well. So as a raid leader, you've got to maintain awareness of how people are actually acting in a raid. And one of the sort of key things that a lot of people ignore as raid leaders is that you're supposed to be developing the people in your raid. So, for example, if you've got a new person who has a lot of talent, does listen and things like that, but they may be doing a particular part of a boss fight wrong, or they may be using a part of their rotation suboptimally, you need to be aware that that's actually going on, and do the analysis and try and assist that person rather than just saying you're underperforming, so I'm going to remove you from the raid.
And that helps a lot. I've been, and Rye, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've been in raid groups to where it was, our way or the highway type deal.
Right, and the most convoluted, complicated strats that had to be done that way, or else, it wasn't happening.
Yeah, so no flexibility in other raids prior, and it's just wonderful with this group to see that there is the flexibility. And, if you see that I'm not doing well on this and I need to improve, y'all comment, y'all do things, and,
Isn't Harisha buttering up Snow?
I'm not buttering up Snow.
Yeah, she is. Do it. Butter.
Oh, can I butter up Snow? Try? Okay, I'm going to butter up Snow.
This sounds like fun.
Well, so I wanted to...
But you know what I'm saying.
I want to quickly circle back, though, because that actually covers a pretty interesting topic that I wanted to end this discussion with. And because I want to bring this up because I know this happens in pretty much every raid group. Not so much with us, but it does happen. So you get to a boss, like as Candy likes to say, every raid has a cock block boss. We get to that boss, we're really struggling. You notice that that our raid group, let's say we got 30 people in the raid group, and we really have some underperforming DPS. As a raid leader, do you think that it's a viable strat to work through progression with some of the stronger DPS and come back and bring some of those other folks through later? Or do you prefer to try to push through with the group that you've got?
In terms of frustration, you have to make that call. So I know the last raid of the last expansion, the sisters were probably our worst fight.
Fuck them.
Oh, fuck those bitches.
that was the worst fight for us. Not only was it that there were bad mechanics, thanks Blizzard, but there was also a weakness in our raid team in terms of the specific DPS and burst requirements for that particular fight. And it did work out that way. Like, it did work out that eventually we had to drop people until we made it through the mechanics to get out of that fight. And it's a balancing act as a raid leader. You're supposed to be giving everybody the exposure to the boss and the ability to overcome a particular boss fight, but the reality is sometimes you can't. And unfortunately for that particular fight, it was for our raid team. We couldn't progress properly because we didn't have the exact right composition and some timing was off inside the raid group. So we ended up having to cut people in order to progress that boss. The people were welcome to come back after we were skipping the boss and get into the final two of the last raid, and we managed to down them through heroic on that.
The happiest day of my life was when we skipped them for the first time.
Hey, I've got a question.
I think that was a good endpoint for that raid, was getting past those.
So now that we're all like 120s, when are we going to go back and like teach those bitches a lesson?
Really?
Teach who?
The coven,
man.
the sisters, the bitches. When are we going to go back and spank their asses?
Trinity of wenches.
All right. So thank you,
Chicken
Snow.
shit.
I really appreciate the input. I think that there's a lot of really good information on what we just discussed, and it's great for some of our newer guild members who may or may not be listening to the podcast. You should be. To kind of hear from your perspective. This is their chance to hear from your perspective, kind of what you're looking for on the raid team, because I know we have a lot of folks signed up who are new to the guild. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see the roster that I know you said. You did say there's going to be a roster coming out this week.
Yep, so I'll be releasing the roster this weekend and sending everyone mail invites for the raid team.
Excellent. And then as far as raid times, we are looking at 20 to 6 server time Fridays and Saturdays still.
Yep, that's correct.
What
right.
to what?
It's 5:20 server time, 8:40 our time. I have to translate for Harisha. Fridays and Saturdays. So the guild can expect that. That will be the core raid that starts on the weekends, and that will run through the end of time or until Snow says otherwise. And then alternatively, we will have the alt raid starting up probably about 5 to 6 weeks after the core raid starts. That will be on Thursdays at the same time. And we really don't have any real requirements to join that other than same kind of basic principle. When we have concerns with progressing through a boss, we follow the same principles of the core raid, but there's not going to be any correlation between the two. So if you got an alt you want to raid with us on Thursdays, you're welcome. If you, Snow, are you still asking people to mail you to sign up if they haven't already done so, other than the I want to raid as? Once that's over and done with?
Yeah, so the primary list will be held in Discord. I'll adjust the heading of the I want to raid as channel. Make sure that you sign up and indicate your class, and then once we've got the raid team running, I'll probably get in contact with you and talk about raid experience, etc.
Excellent. All right, guys. Well, look forward to that coming. We will be talking probably about that ad nauseum in the podcast here. So we'll be looking forward to bringing Snow back to talk about his first thoughts on the raid once we get a chance to get in and see some of it.